Welcome to today's webinar for the Catalytic Grant Fund, Maximizing the Harvest to Cut Waste and Bring Quality Produce to Market. So just last week, ReFED announced an open call for innovative technologies and solutions and initiatives that can reduce on-farm loss and maximize the value of surplus produce and establish new market opportunities, while ideally increasing profitability for farmers. So the purpose of today's special informational webinar is really to support all of you by answering questions and sharing information about what makes a strong application. And then before we dive in, we just want to provide introductions to the Grant Fund team, an overview of ReFED for those of you who aren't familiar with us yet, and just share a couple of quick announcements. So the Catalytic Grant Fund is managed by the Capital and Innovation team, including myself and Alejandro. And in my role, I don't just oversee the grant fund, I also manage our suite of services for solution providers in the food waste space like all of you, really helping them to grow their impact. And Alejandro, I want you to take a moment, please unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Angel. And in my role within ReFED, I'm basically like the ears on the ground for funders, whether it's philanthropic, impact investors, or venture capital. And so I provide that lens when it comes to looking at, okay, what is the most impactful work that we could be doing with this grant fund? And of course, I support the wonderful Angel when it comes to reviewing these applications.
Thanks, Alejandro. And for those of you who aren't familiar with ReFED, we're a nonprofit and we work to catalyze the food system toward evidence-based action to stop wasting food. The goal of our work is really to increase the adoption of food waste solutions. Now, before we get into the conversation, I just want to share a couple of quick announcements. One, I'm very excited to share that early next week, registration will be open for our 2025 Food Waste Solutions Summit. It's happening on June 23rd through the 25th, and it's happening in Seattle, Washington. After our biggest event yet this past year in Baltimore, we're heading across the country to the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, with its commitment to sustainability, vibrant urban agriculture tradition, and a rich ecosystem of native foods. We feel like it's a really perfect backdrop for our growing gathering of thought leaders and innovators who are driving change across the food system. So for a limited time, you will be able to register at a special early bird discounted rate. And this is the lowest price that you'll be able to get a summit ticket for. So definitely take advantage of it if you can. You can find additional information and you'll be able to register for the summit at summit.refed.org, and Alejandro will be sending that through the chat now. Next up, also be sure to mark your calendars for the next ReFED webinar. It's coming up on January 13th at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're doing it in collaboration with Menus of Change University Research Collaborative. It's a 1-hour virtual event, and we're going to be exploring the new Repurpose with a Purpose toolkit, specifically designed for food service professionals like restaurant managers, chefs, and dining operators. And it offers these actionable, cost-effective strategies and recipes to utilize high-quality prepped ingredients that would have been wasted. So you can register for the webinar in the upcoming events section of the ReFED website, which we're also going to be sharing in the chat. Okay, I think those are all the announcements. Let's go ahead and jump into the meat of today's webinar. We're going to start off by explaining what the Catalytic Grant Fund is, how it works, and its impact so far. So taking a step back, at ReFED, we talk a lot about the importance of catalytic funding and how it's critical to scaling food waste solutions. And when I'm talking about catalytic funding, I'm talking about capital that's patient, risk tolerant, and flexible, designed to create additional impact. That's why we launched this grant fund. So our fund focuses on opportunities where its funding and support can unlock additional funding and impact. And we do this by providing recoverable and non-recoverable grants to nonprofits and for-profits. And then, of course, we provide post-grant support. And we're really looking for initiatives with this high impact potential as measured by food waste reduced and greenhouse gas emissions reduced. Now, the fund continuously is raising capital from other donors, and then we deploy it through a series of open call cycles. And these are built around specific priority food waste themes and are really rooted in ReFED's data, our analysis, and subject matter expertise about where this grant funding and support is most needed. So we've already held 2 open calls. One was focused on consumer food waste, and the most recent one was on restaurant food waste. Now, I want to take a beat because this here is probably the most important part. This is the eligibility criteria very specifically for the grant fund. Now, an applicant must meet these 5 criteria. The first is around organization type. We do not fund individuals, but we will support benefit corporations, for-profits, nonprofits, and public-private partnerships. The second is around where are you operating? So an applicant must be operating in the United States, or you can be seeking funding to expand to the US if you're based internationally. Now, the next one is about how are you going to use the funds? Keep in mind the average grant size is $100,000 to $250,000, and the typical grant term is for 2 years. So with that in mind, we really ask that applicants show us that you can put to use at least $100,000 within 2 years. Now, the fourth piece is, of course, about the catalytic nature of the funding request. We require that applicants show us that this funding and support from ReFED could help you receive additional funding, maybe through some matching grant, or advance your impact that wouldn't have been possible without ReFED's funding and support. And then lastly, of course, we request that this funding be used for a solution or initiative that's relevant to the open call theme, which in this case is the on-farm food loss. All right, now let's talk about how this application and review process works, just so you know what to expect. First off, there's a 2-phased application process. The first phase is to submit a letter of intent. And from there, the grant fund team is going to review those letters of intent, and then we're going to invite a select group of applicants to the second phase, which is to submit a full application. Then we bring in an independent review committee. So this is a group of subject matter experts, industry leaders who are going to help review those applications to really help ReFED make sure we're challenging our own assumptions and biases when reviewing applications. After that, we conduct deep due diligence, and then a selection committee will determine who exactly the grantees will be. Now, since we've launched the grant fund, we've selected a wide range of grantees from all sorts of organizations, and they offer a range of food waste solutions. And I'm happy to say that over half of the portfolio has diverse leadership, and we really hope to encourage more diverse leaders to apply for funding from us. We're also excited to share that the grant fund has achieved a 15x multiplier effect. Now, I mentioned that the Catalytic Grant Fund wants to help attract additional funding, and so we've been able to help our portfolio to raise over $30.2 million after just distributing $2.1 million. Now, building off this exciting momentum, we're thrilled to be launching this next open call. So this open call, our goal is to really surface solutions that can reduce the loss of nutrient-rich fruits and vegetables on farms. Based on ReFED's data, over 17 million tons of surplus produce was generated on farms in 2023 and lost because they weren't harvested. And I think that was over 80%. Now, we want to support technologies, solutions, and initiatives that can reduce this loss, really maximize the value of that surplus produce in a way that's economically viable for farmers and ideally increasing their profitability. So as we set out to design this open call, we talked to several industry experts, including producers, solution providers, funders, and academics. And through those conversations, we consistently heard that there are these common challenges faced by farmers when it comes to reducing on-farm loss. And I want to cover those today because we really want you to show us how you are solving these problems for farmers in your letter of intent. So the first common thing we heard was rigid buyer specifications. And I'm sure many of you know this, right? Many buyers, especially retailers, demand that produce meet these strict size, shape, color, and uniformity standards, even if deviations don't affect the quality of safety or safety of the product. right? In some cases, buyers are also looking at ripeness ranges, and they'll reject produce that's slightly underripe or overripe, even if it's still consumable. Additionally, rigid specifications don't always account for alternative uses of produce. So that leaves farmers with these limited options for secondary markets or processing. The other thing we heard that was a common challenge is labor availability, right? A shortage of skilled or available workers can delay or prevent the timely harvest of produce, and that can lead to spoilage or reduced quality. And then we know that certain fruits and vegetables really require skilled labor for harvesting, especially if they're delicate. So a lack of trained workers can result in suboptimal handling, and then that can reduce the marketability of the produce. The other thing that we heard was price volatility. Sudden drops in market prices may make it economically impractical for farmers to harvest or transport produce because the cost of labor and logistics can exceed the revenue. So farmers typically also plant excess produce just to hedge against market uncertainties or anticipated demands. But if price drops unexpectedly, surplus produce may go unsold and result in loss. The last thing that was mentioned quite frequently was limited infrastructure. The lack of in-field cooling or proper storage facilities can cause produce to begin to degrade quickly, especially with temperature fluctuations, and they'll become more vulnerable to pests, mold, and other environmental factors. So without adequate cooling and storage infrastructure, farmers can be forced to leave produce in the field or sell them quickly at lower prices. So again, with all of this in mind, we really want applications to show us how they're addressing these real problems for farmers. Now, ultimately, you tell us how your solution is solving this problem and how it's reducing on-farm food loss. We want you to tell us. But if it's helpful, here are some examples of eligible solutions that we would consider. So one is around market diversification. We would consider solutions that create secondary markets for off-spec produce and even byproducts like carrot tops or broccoli leaves that are typically left in the fields. And you can show us how you're processing these products into purees or juices to provide farmers with additional revenue streams. We'll also consider different technologies like tools that assist in harvesting delicate produce and sorting product to meet those really strict SKU specifications. And of course, that infrastructure piece, if you're seeking funding for storage, cooling, or processing infrastructure, we'd love to learn about what you're trying to do. We know there are solutions like on-site evaporative cooling, decentralized storage solutions, or even mobile cooling for small and remote farms. And all of this we would consider. We're also looking at solutions that manage for abiotic and biotic stressors. So with the real impacts of climate change, we know that there are these extreme droughts, flooding that's happening. So we'd welcome solutions that address these temperature changes, these pest life cycle extensions, and drought stress, which all affect produce quality. Now, again, these are just examples. We want you to tell us about your solution and how it's, again, solving a problem for the farmer and really reducing on-farm loss. That said, there are solutions that are ineligible. Very specifically, traditional fertilizers and pesticides. Shelf life extension solutions are also ineligible. And I want to acknowledge that, yes, shelf life extension solutions are impactful in reducing food waste post-harvest, but we found that these solutions are really relevant and impactful for distributors and retailers, more so than to farmers and producers. Also ineligible are organics recycling initiatives. So solutions like composting and anaerobic digestion, they're definitely important for food waste reduction, but they don't align with our goal of maximizing surplus produce in a way that's economically viable for farmers or increases their profitability. Now, relatedly, charitable programs like gleaning are ineligible. And this is because typically these types of programs don't pay farmers for the produce. That said, we know that there are new programs out there that are addressing these common challenges, and that might be really appealing for farmers. So if you have questions, definitely let us know, because we are open to learning about these new models. All right, so we've talked a lot about the solutions that are eligible and ineligible and the challenges that farmers are facing. So let's talk about what makes a strong application. When you go to submit your letter of intent, it's really important that you convey these different pieces. One, again, you gotta show that you're addressing one of the challenges we mentioned before, really solving a problem for the farmer, as well as showing us a proven ability to reduce on-farm food loss in a way that's economically viable. You also need to demonstrate that your work can scale or it can be replicated in other areas. Applicants also need to provide a clear explanation of how the funding that you're asking for and ReFED support can unlock additional funding or impact for your organization. And then lastly, we want to know about your team. Tell us how your team's knowledge, skills, and other assets are going to enable you to successfully execute the use of funding. All right, so a few friendly reminders, and definitely want to get to your questions. When you go to submit your letter of intent, you're going to want to follow the link on the screen, and we're also going to share this in the chat. And if you're new to the grant fund and haven't applied for funding from us before, you're going to first create a login and a profile. And then if you have already submitted a request to the Catalytic Grant Fund, you're just going to sign in as usual and then select the Get Started to access the letter of intent form. Once you've filled out the letter of intent, there is a green submit button on your dashboard, and you have to hit that to actually submit it once you're finished. Otherwise, it'll just be sitting there and we won't have it on the back end. So that's kind of the things to know about submitting the letter of intent, filling it out online. But we want to highlight, mark your calendars, the letter of intent is due on Tuesday, January 21st, 2025 by 11:59 p.m. Eastern. The grant fund team is going to conduct a review of all the submitted letters of intent. And like I said, we'll invite select applicants to submit a full application. And then that's your moment to give us more details about your proposal, including your past track record and financials. From there, the group of independent review committee members are going to evaluate those full applications. And then we're going to conduct that deep due diligence, and a subset of those applicants are going to be presented to the selection committee to review. And just so you know, the selection committee is comprised of internal ReFED team members, and they're ultimately going to select the grantees. We anticipate this process to be completed by the end of May 2025. So that's when everyone will know whether or not they've received funding. So that's the timeline. We've talked about that and how to apply. Want to go ahead and open the floor to questions. So Alejandro, I'm going to hand it over to you to kind of walk us through the questions that we have now. But if you have a question, you can also raise your hand by using that raise hand option under reactions as pictured on the screen. And then, of course, feel free to submit questions through chat if you would like to. So Alejandro, what questions do we have in chat, if any? Yeah, I'm just trying to.
Sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. There are a few in chat. First and foremost, it looks like people are asking for, is there going to be a recording available for this presentation? And I believe the answer, Angel, is yes.
Yes, there is. Yes,
okay,
we
perfect.
will
So
share that out. Yeah.
Okay, so that's dealt with. Another clarifying question is around regional urban farms. Would tools that are trying to help them be in scope for this challenge?
I would say yes. Again, so long as you're showing us how you're reducing the loss on these farms, but also whether or not it can be replicated on other farms and in other regions. That would be important to show in your application.
Okay, perfect. Prema, I will call on you shortly. There's just one other question. The other question that we have here is that, I think to clarify, it looks like this question is about related to refrigeration units for their operations. They're questioning whether this grant is more focused on scalability and bigger operations, or is this also for smaller farms?
Both. Definitely also for smaller farms. again, yes, we talk about scale, but we're also open to solutions that can be replicated on large commercial farms, be used on smaller farms. Again, you just need to show us how it can be applied in these different settings, but it's definitely still eligible.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well. Looking at the chat now. Will technology that increases the efficiency and viability of dehydrating technology be acceptable?
It depends on how that dehydrating technology is going to be used, how it supports the farmer. So you would just need to provide us with more detail on how exactly it's going to advance this dehydrating technology, how that technology is going to help the farmer, what the ROI is. So I think the devil's in the details on that one.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. I think like I think when Angel and I have been looking at like innovations that can change a whole sector, sometimes it's like 1 or 2 levels away from directly like that's going to reduce like food loss and food waste. But if that intervention is well explained, like, okay, this is what it's going to do if you make dehydrating better, then I think that's like, if you can reason that within your application, I think it very much falls in our scope. Another question is, does farm harvest have to be in the US?
So the solution needs to apply for the US context. If you operate in other countries, that's fine, but you have to be either expanding into the US and your solution has to be able to work in the US. Should we get to some of the raised hands real quick, Alejandro, and then we'll come back to the chat?
Let's move to them. So Prema, I did promise that you could ask your question first.
Thank you, Alejandro. Hi, Angel. My question is, so I'm just starting a backyard urban farm, and I am thinking about, what I'm going to do with the broccoli leaves. I am eating them as much as possible because I have almost like 7,000 square feet. I'm expanding. I recently got another catalytic grant. So is there any restrictions on what is the size of the farm if I'm coming up with solutions? Like, let's say for my farm operations, I might need it dehydrated because I want to make a byproduct with my waste that is going to be composted.
So no restrictions on the size of the farm. But again, whatever you're doing, ideally, we'll be able to do it on another farm despite size. And you just have to explain to us how the funding is going to, yes, enable this technology, but how else are we going to get this technology out there to other farmers?
And second question is like, for most of the farmers, let's say small scale farmers, where I live, there are many farmers that take help from the grant writers to help them with grant writes because of the language barriers, and they don't understanding how to write a grant. So if they're submitting, can this grant pay for that grant writing? I know some grants will allow it, some grants won't allow it. So what is that with you guys? Like, if I hire a grant writer or I have a grant writer, can I say, hey, you get 1% or 2% of the grant if I receive it, and is that allowable?
I'm thinking for a moment. I think it is. You would just need to kind of explain that in your application.
Okay. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. I'd like to now call on Bree Smith.
Hey, I think the situation we have is kind of unique, so I just want to talk through it and make sure it makes sense for the context. I work for a major retailer that is producing fresh squeezed orange juice, and a lot of their facilities US wide. And the juice, of course, is producing a lot of pulp on the back end. We're already, organics recycling it, but we're looking into finding an upcycling solution. I mean, it's tons and tons of orange juice waste that has a lot of opportunity for, like value added products somewhere else. So with it being on the other side of the waste stream, is it still an initiative that would make sense if we can spin it in a way that helps farmers? Because like we're seeing these oranges, some from the US, some from outside. And so I don't know, we're just trying to find a solution for like the end result of juicing.
It is interesting. I think, again, if you can tell us how it's going to help the farmer in the end, and how it's going to reduce on-farm loss, we would consider it. But if it isn't there, unfortunately, it would be ineligible.
Okay.
Alejandro, anything you would add or clarify?
No, I think I agree. I think as you've explained it, like if it's just like upcycling waste that is from like juicing,
Yeah.
that would be ineligible. There has to be sort of a link to, okay, like this helps the farmer because you could offer better contracts for them.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
And Bree, if you want to talk more about it, we can set up a call separately. You can just shoot us an email.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay, we have Cassie, who's just raised their hand.
Hi. Hey, Angel, Cassie from
Hey,
Nice
good to see you.
Yeah, I had two quick questions. One, as you know, we received a catalytic grant in the past, so I was curious if we would still be considered and eligible to apply for another round if that's available.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, great. And then two, as you know, we do a lot of charitable food recovery, but we have a program now where we're paying farmers and growers and gleaning organizations for their surplus produce. And so would it be eligible because we are paying for the surplus produce? Again, it's surplus to mitigate the on-farm food loss, but then it would be a charitable redistribution of that produce. Curious if that would be eligible. And we could talk more, but yeah, curious.
Based on your description, it sounds like yes, it's eligible.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Alondra, maybe we can jump to the chat.
Yeah, let's go to the chat. There's a few questions, and I think just to clarify two items. So we are doing we will be sharing out a recording, but I think there's also a question on will we be sharing the deck?
Oh, we can share the deck. I mean, absolutely.
Okay. And then another question, I think people were wondering about, I think you answered the amount of grants that we're hoping to give out. And I think maybe just to clarify grant size.
Yeah.
I think you've presented both like 100 to 250K. What is the average expected grant?
In the middle. We definitely don't go above 250. I don't think we've ever gone below 100. It really comes down to, I guess maybe average has been around 180, but it really comes down to your use of funds. And you have to, we would recommend that when you go to complete your letter of intent and try and stay in that range and show us how you're going to use that money. Does that help? I don't know if Alejandro, if you would clarify anything.
Yeah. No, I think that's perfect.
Okay.
And so looking at, this is a good high level one. People are wondering if these funds would be considered for general operating or programmatic.
I think again, it goes back to what are your operations and what are your programs that we would be funding? And again, how is it reducing on-farm food loss? How is it helping the farmer and solving a problem for them? If your operations do that, then yes, we would fund it, but you would have to explain that to us.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense. And then I think someone in the chat has clarified. I know there's been a lot of talk about like, does food need to be grown in the US or do companies need to be operating in the US? I think an actual nuance that some people here have brought up is that a lot of food comes from outside the US, particularly Mexico.
Oh, I see.
And so with that cross-border nuance, is that eligible? How do we feel about that for the grant fund?
I think it depends on how the money is being used. Without those details, it's hard for me to answer. So at a high level, I think we would be open to it. But again, I think the devil's in the details on that one. Alejandro, anything you would clarify on that?
No, I think that's right. It really is about the details, like where are you preventing that waste from occurring?
Yeah.
And I guess also like yeah, like is the farmer actually getting some sort of reasonable return?
Mm-hmm.
Looking at specific questions, and this is from Kai, would either of these be in scope for this grant fund? First one is extension and outreach training about implementing effective solutions. So I'd call this education.
Mm-hmm. I think, Kai, if you show us that you have actual farmers and organizations that are going to participate, and if you have a proven track record doing that, we're open to it. But if there isn't a market for that, if you don't have a lineup of customers, that would be hard for us to support.
And Kai's other question was related to a project with growers to assess and compare, keep it dry and keep it cool solutions for a particular crop. And so I would think of that as like a bit of research and data collection.
I think, Kai, if there's a gap and a need for this research, and you can show us how this research is going to actually be shared more broadly and drive change and action, if you can show us that in the application, we would consider it.
Thanks, Angel. Thanks, Alejandro. This is Kai. Just to quickly add to that, I think these two kind of go together. Maybe like as in if there was funding for a project where you test out this like a keep it dry technology across with growers specifically who volunteer to for the technology to be tested in their farms, and then you provide the training to others, so more of an extension type effort to scale it out to say this worked in this environment. That would be kind of maybe the testing piece. And the training and extension is very much using universities or other organizations that do go out and do training of either extension agents or the growers themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, it would be me partnering obviously with others. That's
right.
That's my bread and butter.
And based on that explanation, it sounds eligible for what we're trying to do.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I want to move to maybe more higher level questions, then we can go back to specific, like solution specific ones. And so Shannon Hickey actually asked a very interesting question. Would you consider overall benefit / income to farmers higher than the amount of prevented food loss of a solution when choosing grantees? So it's like, are we doing trade-offs, or is there a preference between income over prevented food loss?
I'm going to answer this a little differently, but I think it will answer your question, Shannon. I think if farmers really need your solution, and that probably means there's some probably ROI there and it is solving a problem for them, that's the most important piece to us. If farmers actually have shown that they need your solution, and if it happens to also improve their profitability and reduce loss, great. But we want to make sure that these solutions are going to be adopted by farmers, and that's why that's so important to us. Alejandro, what would you add or clarify?
No, I think that's fair enough, I think.
And Shannon, feel free to unmute if that wasn't clear. I want to make sure we answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. I guess I manage a hunger relief program that also gleans. So my end customer here would still be hunger relief agencies. But I'm, already gleaning and sorting through a lot of B, C grade produce that could be processed. And I could, potentially offer a small amount of money to the farmer for the poundage of, that B or C grade produce that we would have left in the field anyways. Or I could find a way for them to get some benefit through hunger relief sales. So I wasn't sure what would be considered like more important to focus on, like the sheer amount of poundage that we could potentially work with.
In this case in particular, I mean, I still stand by what I said earlier about really solving a need, but in this case in particular, I would encourage you to to look more at how farmers are going to get paid in this situation. Yeah.
Okay. And then I guess I have one other question. I do work with some farmers where I forward contract with them to be growing specifically for hunger relief work. Would that apply to this at all?
Short answer is yes. We are
Okay.
interested in like advanced contracting and innovative contracts that help farmers, guarantee that that their produce is going to go somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Another question is related to a values-aligned produce distribution hub that's looking to buy excess crops from small BIPOC farmers that can't always be sold. And I think the root of this question is going to be about, I think the value they're providing is that this is meeting a gap. It's filling a gap in some way, whether it's distributing to local access channels that don't have that access to food at a lower rate. So in terms of like a lower cost, how do we look at funding solutions if it's addressing a gap? Does that make it eligible? And I guess, does that get preference? And Val, let me know if I've messed up your question too.
Sounds like maybe you didn't. I think if it's solving a gap, and Alejandro, feel free to weigh in, it makes it eligible. Without knowing more, I'm not sure if we would give it preference necessarily, but I do think it makes it eligible.
And another question is actually about clarifying the rigid buyer specification. And so the question is actually around, isn't this more of a policy change and getting grocery chains and city ordinances to like act on this? And so maybe with that in mind, would we support someone who is writing a proposal to do that kind of work?
Yeah, so with rigid buyer specification, I guess to your point, it directly would require policy. We are open again to other solutions or technologies that kind of work with this existing challenge of strict buyer specifications. I think in terms of funding a proposal around policy, we would consider it, but I want to encourage anyone who's considering doing that. In your proposal, you'll have to really show us why you and your team and your resources or whomever is working with you, collaborating with you, is going to have a real impact and change and is going to somehow manage to drive policy. It's not enough, I think, just to put together some sort of policy proposal. We want to show that you have the resources to back that up. Alejandro, anything you would add to that?
No, I think that's right. That's the right delineation. It's very hard to fund policy or initial work. So I think we need to understand, okay, these are the ways that you can get something like this to happen. And if it's convincing enough for us to okay, this plan is de-risked in a certain way, we think that there's a medium level chance of success, then I think that would make it more easier for us to review and then also determine if it's a good application.
Perfect.
Okay. Another question we have, and I think this is a good one because this is related a lot to our selection criteria. If this person has a proven track record at their for-profit, but they want to apply under a nonprofit that they've recently started, is that all right?
Yes, absolutely. It would just be important to really demonstrate to us the impacts and the milestones you've achieved with your for-profit, and that will help us better understand your capabilities with this new nonprofit. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And if you look at it specifically the application, we have a section which is called track record. And so what Angel was talking about is especially if your track record is applicable to the work that you're doing now, that is stuff that you should be highlighting in your application. Okay. I'm just catching up with some of the questions that have come in. I'll look at Bella Wood. Their question has just come in. In terms of forward contracting / advance payments, can we pay farmers in advance for them to grow for specific markets, i.e. school markets that can't pay in advance, and subsequently getting the funds back when sold in market, making this fund somewhat recyclable?
The short answer is yes. I think it would be eligible.
And I'm just making sure now that I did not miss any questions.
And feel free to raise your hand too if you have any questions still lingering. Yeah, Jessica, go for it.
Are you going to be available for brief meetings? I think in the past you've offered that.
Yeah, absolutely. You just have to shoot me an email and we can schedule some
Super.
time. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, our goal really is to make this as easy as possible for anyone interested in applying, and we don't want to waste your time. So if you want to jump on a call, we want to make sure that you're, eligible and putting your best foot forward. Like, we're happy to put that time up front to make sure this is a good use of your time.
I think let's talk about the gleaning example a bit, because I think there's a few people here. And I believe one of the questions that was asked in the past kind of touched upon this. If it's gleaning, but then they're trying to provide high stipends to the farmers who provide the excess produce. So it's like there is that level of like a return. Would that be eligible for this project proposal?
Yes, absolutely. I think we would consider those. I think maybe just to add a little nuance, we're gonna want to more understand, I guess, the method in which and like how much they're being paid and how much they're being paid, how in advance, or how, like, all of those details will kind of matter, because we want, again, to make sure that whatever new way you're approaching gleaning and paying farmers back, that others can learn from it and actually implement it too. We want, it doesn't necessarily have to, you don't necessarily have to scale it, but can we help replicate this model? And so we want to make sure that it's going to be applicable in different settings. Hopefully that helps add a little nuance there. Alejandro, anything you would add or clarify?
I would add just the point on sustainability of the initiative, because I think that becomes interesting. Like in the past, and I think like currently, gleaning is like usually accessing the product is free, and it's through like volunteers that are willing to grab it, and having a partner like a food producer that's willing to allow you to come and harvest. If you're now starting to pay for that produce, I think what would be also really important in your application is communicating, okay, this new model that we're building can be sustained over a period of time because of these reasons. Like, okay, like how are you getting the funding to be able to give that money to a farmer? And I think that's going to be really important for that specific type of application.
That's a great add, Alejandro. Thank you. One other thing I'm noticing in the chat, I think there are questions about, does the solution have to apply to a certain type of farmer? Can you help us find farmers to test or pilot solutions? I think to answer that first piece of does it have to apply to a certain type of farmer? No, ideally it's applicable to smallhold farmers, large commercial, like there's no limitation. I think, again, we just want to see that can it be applied in different types of farm settings. In terms of whether or not we can help bring, farmers and find collaborators for you to test or pilot your solution, we cannot guarantee it, but we can definitely try. We have partners that have relationships with farmers and might be able to help you find someone that's, close by in your region, whatever it may be, So we can, that's part of the type of support we, consider us, if you're a grantee, an extended team member, and we will do our best to help try and find you collaborators and partners. Alejandra, do you see anything else? And, anyone is more than welcome to raise their hand if you still have an outstanding question.
I feel like we've answered this question, but I just want to make it clear. So given the project was approved and eligible, would we, as in ReFED, prefer to fund capacity building, so team building, etc., operational costs of scaling, or replicable technology development improvements?
I would say if you're approved and eligible, I don't think we technically have a preference. I think we trust you as the solution provider to tell us what amount of money you need and why you need it and how it's going to make an impact. And we trust you that you know best. And so tell us about it. And I think it's our job to kind of, again, we'll do the diligence and, we'll evaluate, but we don't actually have a preference necessarily.
And someone here is asking more of like it looks like a portal question, so related to just the application. Is there a place where you can see a list of documents that will be required to submit for the grant?
Yeah, I think Cassie actually nicely linked the Google Doc that has all the prompts and questions. And so in there, you will find anything that we need in terms of additional materials. But I can also tell you right off the bat that the only material I believe we require in the letter of intent is some sort of pitch deck, sell sheet type of material. And then anything else you add is completely up to you. Any additional documents you're more than welcome to add to, but the one we do require is some sort of pitch deck or sell sheet.
Okay. I believe I've gone through all the questions in the chat, but I would ask that if anyone has any further questions, please raise your hand now.
Going once, going twice. I think that was the pause, Alejandro. So feel free to, we'll pull up the slides. I'm going to put in my email address into the chat function. If anything comes up as you're working on your letter of intent or deciding whether or not to apply, please do not hesitate to email me, and we'll be happy to work with you to figure out, whether or not you're eligible and answer any other questions you have. But let's go ahead, Alejandro, and pull those slides back up, and we'll wrap up. So just to kind of remind everyone, we really want to help you make sure this is a good use of your time. So if you want to learn more about the Catalytic Grant Fund open call, you can visit the website that's on the screen or shoot us an email. We definitely really appreciate you. Thanks, Jessica. I realized I entered my personal email. I guess you can shoot me a personal email, but also here is my actual work email. Thank you. So feel free to shoot me an email. And we really appreciate your time and interest in the Catalytic Grant Fund. I really want to highlight, though, that the letters of intent for this open call are due on January 21st, 2025, next year, by 11:59 p.m. Eastern. So please, please, please mark that on your calendars. And thank you again for joining us. And if we don't talk soon, happy holidays and Happy New Year. Thanks again.